Hello, everyone. So we're so grateful to have Jill here to do this workshop for us. Jill Kaigetsu Greenbaum currently teaches visual thinking skills internationally. She holds a doctorate in curriculum development from Teachers College, Columbia University. She has taught students with special education needs in New York City and was a principal and an administrator. She was a director for two sexual assault survivor programs. She's currently enrolled in Upaya Zen Center's chaplaincy program. Thank you so much for being with us and offering this Peacemaker Circle presentation. So now I will go ahead and hand it over to Jill.
Thank you, Chloe. Good morning or good afternoon. It is a delight to be here with all of you. I myself, my feet are touching the ground on Munse Lenape land in New York, just a bit north and west of New York City. And you have a bit of background about me. What I'd like to share that's really relevant to our being here. Well, maybe I'll even ask a question first. Who here has done Zentangle before or knows a bit about it? And that's not necessary, but it's always nice to know.
May I speak?
Please do. And throughout, you are always welcome to come off of mute and ask questions.
Okay. I had never heard of it until I saw the advertisement for this workshop, but have been doing it madly ever since.
Oh, how wonderful. I'm so delighted to hear that. Terrific. And so that's the perfect segue into years ago when my daughter was in high school and was looking into college. She had a good and not a great experience. And so I saw that as an opportunity to develop some programming for young people who were in the college admissions process. And in creating a coaching program for young adults, I wanted to help them find ways to calm down, gain a sense of agency and autonomy, and a relaxed focus. And so I looked to meditation, and some students were open to that, just like some adults. And I thought there might be some other possibilities. So this was back in 2013. And so I discovered Zentangle online and started doing it madly, just like Mary was talking about, and discovered that you could become a certified Zentangle teacher by learning from the creators, Rick Roberts and Maria Thomas. And so just a little background about them. Rick is formerly a Zen Buddhist monk, in addition to having a lot of other careers as a New York City taxi cab driver or a financier. He is an Indian flute maker and player. And so he's had a varied past. And so he comes to this and he is the Zen in Zentangle, the meditative piece. And Maria is a calligrapher by trade. And so you might know her website, Pendragon. Don't look there now. And so she is the Tangle. And so one day, as the origin story goes, Maria was working in her studio. They were both friends. She's working in her studio. She's working on an illustrated manuscript. Rick comes over. He wants to share some ideas and thoughts with her. And he has a hard time breaking into her concentration, without being rude. And so he said, when you're focused on your calligraphy, it's like when I am meditating. It's really a relaxed focus and a sense of calm. And is there something that we can create together that we can teach other people to do? And so that is how this all came about. And so I've been a certified Zentangle teacher since the fall of 2013, and I'm actually going back this fall for even more training because I just can't get enough. And so I'm delighted to be here with you and share just a bit in the time that we have about Zentangle. And as I said, you're always welcome to answer questions. And let's dive into what we're going to be working on. It's my guess that maybe, since you knew about this, you went to an art store or craft store, got in touch with Zentangle and picked up some materials, and yet those are not necessary or required. You can work with the materials you have in your home. In essence, I'm going to show you what you would get if we were live and in person, just to give you a sense of what this is all about. And so you would be working with a tile. That is our language for a 3.5-inch square. We'd be using a cream colored tile made from Italian paper with a deckled edge, so kind of a rough edge. And everything in Zentangle relates to their philosophy, which shows up in so many different ways. Part of it is we work with the best materials we have with us and available, the best materials possible. So sometimes that means we have tiles, and other times it means we have loose leaf paper and ballpoint pens, which has happened when I've taught sometimes in public schools, or when I was in Nepal for a medical service trip and knew of a home for abandoned children and asked if I could come and teach them Zentangle. And I brought enough kits for all the girls that were 7 and older, because that's usually when we start teaching people into their 80s and 90s. But there were girls that were 3, 4, 5, and 6 there. And so usually we don't teach kids that young because they don't have the fine motor control, but we found loose leaf paper and crayons, and they sat and did it with everyone else. And it was an amazing experience. In fact, it's up on the place's Facebook page. It's called House with Heart. And it was back in September of 2018. So there's a picture of me there with all the girls and the one boy that was in the home, and it was a wonderful experience. So it shows that it's really very flexible and malleable. We work with the materials that we have, another one of which would be a Micron pen, just because it is archival ink, it's permanent ink. And we work with an 01, which is a really tiny, tiny point. So I'll show you, and it may even be hard for you to see how tiny a point that is. And so if you happen to have a Micron, you're probably familiar with them. But if it's the first time you've picked it up, you want to be careful to tickle the ink out of it, as opposed to mashing down harder to get the ink to come out, because it just doesn't work that way. All right, so we work carefully with our Micron pens. We always put the top on when we're not using them so they don't dry out. And we tend to store these horizontally, just so you know. You would also have received in the kit a pencil that looks like this. So what do you notice about this pencil, aside from the fact that it says Zentangle? What's missing?
Eraser.
Yes, exactly. An eraser is missing. And because in Zentangle, the philosophy is we are deliberate with our strokes, and there are times that we make strokes that are unanticipated. And then we work with it to make it beautiful, because there is no way to erase what has happened in our life. We need to work with it. And so that's why we don't ever use pencils with erasers. The only other tool that we generally use to begin is a tortillon or a smudger. And if you don't have one, that's okay. You have your pinky with you. That will do the trick. It's not quite the same, because this is very pointed and gets into those small areas, and you might have a little oil on your finger because you're human, and that might get onto your tile, but it's not a big deal. It's all going to come together beautifully. So I'm going to pause there, because I do know I have a tendency to speak at a New York fast rate. So I'll pause and just ask if you have any questions about anything that I've said so far, or something else that has occurred to you. Thanks, Kim. I needed that head nod. I'm very visual. That's very helpful. Okay. In that case, we're going to get down to business, so to speak. So I'm going to, or perhaps actually, Chloe, will you spotlight me? And that way I'm going to keep my view of the gallery so I can see everyone in case anyone has a question. But I'll be working on the wall behind me, and it will be easier for you to see when I am large. So I've just written Zentangle up here, and actually before we put pen to paper, let me just say that Zentangle is different than doodling. In fact, those of us that do Zentangle almost take offense, because doodling is often thought to be mindless. You're just and it may not be for everyone, but that is generally what people think of when doodling. And Zentangle is mindful. Our strokes are deliberate. And so it really is a difference, and we only use 5 marks on a paper. So I'm going to share with you what those are at this point. And I'm just going to write them over here. And this is also where I'm going to write all the names of the patterns that we'll be using. You might put it on the back of your tile or on a different piece of paper. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of Zentangle patterns. And that's why when you learn something, be sure to write down the name if you like it, because you want to be able to find it again and not have to sift and sort. All right, so the 5 marks that are used in Zentangle, either alone or in some combination, are these. And so that would be a dot, a circle, a straight line, an S shape, and a C shape. And so those are the marks of Zentangle. And I will say one other thing before we dive in as an example. Another thing that is different about Zentangle and some doodling that you'll see is that it is non-representational. So if you see something like this, which is quite lovely, right? So that has Zentangle patterns in it, but it is not truly Zentangle because it is in the shape of a heart. It's representative. All right, so it doesn't mean don't do it. I love this. I make things all the time that are representational to give to people. But for it to be truly Zentangle, no matter which orientation you hold your tile, it doesn't look like anything in particular, right? It's not an elephant, it's not a heart or that kind of thing. All right, enough of the talk. Let's get down to the work and play of this. So, what I've done, and my enthusiasm carried me away so that you're not truly looking at a square here, so my apologies, but I drew a square so you would know what the outline is within which you are working. All right, so that I've done in brown here. And if I work in pencil, you're not going to see it clearly enough. And so when I use a green marker, and let me know if you can't see that well enough, I'll switch to a blue. I'm just trying to get away from black. When I use a green marker, it means I'm using my pencil. And I will cue you, but on occasion I act very humanly and make a mistake. All right, so you're always welcome to say, Jill, are we doing pencil or pen? So in these two examples, the two tiles we'll be working on today, we're going to make a frame within which we will work. So please make a dot in each of the corners of your tile. So you'll make a nice light pencil dot, and then we're going to connect the dots by drawing a line and literally creating a frame. And I would do a light pencil stroke. You just need to see it. It's going to melt into the design that we create. And I'm guessing that some of you are saying, oh my gosh, I can't make a straight line. It's got a wiggle. It always goes up, it goes down. And so don't worry about that. We're leaving our inner critic at the door. I'm looking at my door as I say that, right? So we are just breathing deeply. I will tell you perhaps a tip around drawing a straight line, if you like, is you always look where you are going rather than where you are. We tend to focus on where our pen or marker point is. In this case, it's your pencil, where your pencil tip is. But if you look instead where you're going, you'll make a straighter line because your hand will follow your eye. All right. So we have our frame. We're now going to draw what's called a string inside of it. And it has that name. It's still a pencil. We're using our pencil. It's as if you were dropping string or a piece of yarn onto a piece of paper. So it's that's how it got the name. And if you would use your pencil to do lines that look like this. Mine have a slight curve. Yours might have a slight curve. They might be straight. It's really fine. But you can see that we've divided the tile into 3 different spaces. And I'm going to write over here the name of the first pattern that we'll work on. And it's called Holly-Ba. And most of the names of the patterns are completely made up and once again are not representational. This actually happens to be the last name of someone that works for Zentangle. But Holly-Ba is the name of the pattern. And so you might want to write that somewhere. And then you can also put down your pencil and pick up your Micron pen or other permanent marker, and we will start to create Holly-Ba. I'm going to work only at this time in the center space. All right, we'll get to the other 2 spaces, but I'm going to stay within those lines. And Holly-Ba often begins by drawing, whoops, not with that marker. We need to feed that marker. I have refillable markers. I'm not actually crazy when I say that. Need to refill. There we go. So I'm drawing two lines that are parallel that connect one side to the other. They have a little curve in them, but not a lot. And sometimes people will say to me, but Jill, can I make really squiggly lines? And I'm like, well, sure you can, but then it won't be holly-bot. It's a different pattern. So you can do what you want, but if we're doing holly-bot, this is how we're starting. All right, so what we do next is we're going to make a second set of lines, and it's going to go underneath what is already there. All right, and so I'm just going to connect, and you can do it exactly the same as me, or you can do it somewhat differently, but you can see that I'm connecting two sides, and I'm pretending to go underneath the first set of parallel lines. And feel free to ask questions as we go. I'm going to do a third set of parallel lines, and just to show you a little variety, I'm going to go under and underneath both sets of lines. You don't have to, but we are working in this middle space, always going under what is already there. And when I have three sets of lines, what I tend to do is I rotate my tile either 90 degrees, like a quarter turn or a half turn. And so if you do, I'm not going to do that here because this is taped to the wall, but tell me, if you rotate your tile, what's the result? What do you see? And this is not meant to be a trick question. It's not a big, heavy answer or anything. It's really, you know, what do you see when you rotate your tile? Does it look the same, or? Oh, Myoshin's given me the visual signal. No, Jill, it's not looking the same.
Looks different.
It does look different. It gives you a different perspective, right? And so you see, as I would call it, more real estate there, or more opportunity for adding lines. And so please make more sets of lines within this center space, and you decide how much you put. There's not a formula or a correct answer. So I'm going to put a few more in myself just for fun. You'll do the same, and then we will move on to another pattern. And my husband does Zentangle also, and his style is actually quite dense. He puts a lot of pattern in a space. I like more spaciousness, and so it's kind of fun and interesting to see how people working with the same designs do them both similarly and differently. I'll give you another minute or so, and then we will move into another pattern. And so, Mary, if any of these patterns are familiar to you, or if you have any questions because you've been dabbling a little bit already, I'm happy to answer them. And so one of the, as Chloe and I were talking before about some of the challenges and opportunities that have arisen as a result of the pandemic, one of the opportunities here is that you will have your tiles with you, and you don't have to finish in the amount of time that we have. You may go back and do some more, although you will learn the finishing steps. You might make some minor changes afterwards. Our next pattern, and this is not to make you rush, you can always let me know that you need another half minute or so. But that is the challenge, right, in working with groups who work at different paces. Our next pattern is called Kipple. So it's over here, Q-U-I-P-P-L-E. And so I am going to put it in this space here. It doesn't matter whether you put it in this open space or this one. You make a choice. And so kibble is really two different size circles. And I start with a large circle first, just so you get a sense of what large looks like to me. And they touch each other and they meander across the page. So yours could meander a little differently, but they tend not to be a straight line. It's as if it were maybe stones in a garden, a path that you were walking. And so all of the large circles touch each other, and then they are surrounded by smaller circles. And so the large circles tend to be the same size. The smaller circles also are the same smaller size. And I'm just going to point out that I've created the frame here just as you have, and I'm making a choice, and you get to choose too. I'm right at the edge of my frame here, and this is the edge of my tile. Do I want to go beyond the edge of my frame? I do. I didn't used to when I started. I used to always stay within the frame that I had created, and then I thought, no, I like it. It feels more organic to me if I'm going outside the frame. You get to choose. So we can see how that's happening here. And I'm even going to go a bit into the holly-bot space. And that's your choice also. And I actually made my little circles rather big, so I've taken up almost all the space here. But I'm going to leave a little bit of white here, just a little, because one of the things we think about in this art form is making what we're, oh, see, and now I'm about to change all of what I just said. Changes in an instant. We try and make it pleasing to our eye, and that means we want spaces that are quite dark, and the next pattern we're doing will be quite dark. Ones which are more open and creamy, and then we will do some shading, which will also make it gray. So we're always trying to have an interesting interplay of the different colors.
Are they supposed to encircle the big circles, or can you leave some edge?
What is typically done, Kim, is that if you left an edge, it would probably be up around the frame as opposed to in the middle of that space, because they tend to encircle it. Good question. Thank you for asking.
Jill, can the big circles overlap?
They generally don't.
But is that an accident?
That was an accident. That was an overenthusiastic accident there.
Okay.
Good question. Thank you for asking. And it's so interesting because when I'm teaching live and in person, I can walk around the room and see how people are doing, and to see some people who I admire who are so precise. You know, every circle is perfect and they're all the same size and all of that. And I'm just like, that is not me. And it is one of those teachable moments also, because we will all make mistakes somewhere along the way. And it's how we work with the mistake. Because this work of Zentangle, or this play, is about consistency and not perfection. So it doesn't mean that I'm not trying, but I'm not always going to get there. So I work to be consistent. I know I just mentioned, I had a thought when I was talking about black and creamy spaces and gray. And I just wanted to point out, because sometimes people will say, oh, do you only work in black and white? And the answer is no. On my website, which is my name, I have a whole page around Zentangle, so you can see lots of things in color. But a class that I'm teaching on Wednesday nights now, it's kind of a drop-in. Anyone that has skills in Zentangle, which you will all have after this class, is welcome to join. But this is something that we did the other week, and this was actually done with a green jelly roll pen. Right, and it's called Rick's Paradox, so it's named after Rick. And it's hard to believe, but all those lines are straight. But because of their placement, they make the round shapes. It's astonishing. And I have to tell you, a number of years ago, I was in the San Francisco airport waiting to board a plane, and I was trying to learn this, and it was so hard for me. So some of these patterns come easily to each of us, and some of them are truly a struggle. All right, I'm going to write up the name of our next pattern. And it's called Knightsbridge. And so Knightsbridge is going to go in my remaining space, and it is a grid pattern. And I tend to make it with a rather curved line, but it could be curved or straight. And they can, and you'll see, just because I like to take the line that's here already, part of Hollybaugh, and I continue it. And I'm making a grid. I don't want my lines too close together because that can be hard to see. I'm going to do this. So those are parallel lines that are taking up the space. And then I'll make another set of parallel lines that are perpendicular to this. And so just because I happen to start the lines in that way, this almost looks like diamonds, you know, straight up and down. But you might have done it somewhat differently, and it might look like more of a checkerboard that isn't yet filled in. And so that's the beauty of this, is that you can do some of these patterns and just change the curve or the angle or where you begin, and things look very different. So another perspective. And so once we have this grid, we're going to fill in every other space. And I can tell you from my experience and my mistakes when I say experience, that if I start to figure out which is every other one down at the bottom or up at the top, I get confused because it's not a square space, right, or a rectangular space. So I always start by filling in one of the spaces that's more towards the middle, because that becomes my reference point. And I'm just noticing I'm wearing a watch, and another one of our philosophies is don't struggle, right? Find a way to work around the challenge. And so I'm right-handed, I wear my watch on my right hand, and when I draw it doesn't always work. So I just take it off and move on. So I filled in one space, and so now I can figure out, well, if this is black, this is white, if I'm going this way, black, white, so this one will be black. So this is often where people say to me, but Jill, couldn't we use something besides a Micron 01 pen because they have such a tiny nib? And the answer is yes, you certainly can use something else. Part of this is enjoying the strokes that you're making and taking the time, breathing slowly and relaxing into it. But if it stresses you out, then find a thicker nib. So once I have one whole, you can't really call it a row or a column because it's not quite standing up straight, but I have one whole area done. I can now use this same reference point and go white, black, white, so this one here will be black. And it will help me fill in all of the Knightsbridge. And so the experience we're having now where there is silence is really typical for whatever age group I am working with, right? So whether it's adults or whether it's ninth graders in a city school classroom, you can hear a pin drop during these sessions. Okie doke. So as you are doing this work, I want to plant a seed for you to be thinking about. In Zentangle, we always sign our artwork on the front of the artwork. And so we make a chop, which would be the Chinese putting the characters together. And so we're not using characters for our names, right? If we're using, like, if I'm using Jill Greenbaum, I am going to use the letters J and G and artfully put them together to become my signature. And so let me just give you an example of what that might look like. I might do two capital letters together, J and G. It's not so appealing to me. I might stack the letters, J and G. I could put the letters lowercase inside each other. But what I've started to do, well, that's not true. What I have done since 2013 is I use this as my chop. So I make the circle for the beginning of a lowercase g, and then I put a lowercase j inside of it. And I will use that on the front of my tile. I'll show you where, but we don't want to put it there yet because we don't know which direction is up, so to speak. You'll have to decide that when you are done with your shading. And then we'll talk about putting in your chop. But hopefully you have a piece of scrap paper next to you and you can start to play around with your initials. You might use 2 initials or 3 initials, side by side, stacked, rotated, uppercase, lowercase, all kinds of possibilities. And sometimes people feel a little stuck. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't figure out something to do with my initials. And so then I'm always happy to assist and offer up some ideas. And so give me a sense of how you're doing. Will another 2 or 3 minutes be sufficient for finishing up with Knightsbridge and moving into shading? Is that feeling comfortable? Thank you, Jamie. Head nods are great. Super. Thank you. Thumbs up are good too.
Jill?
Yes.
I noticed on your Knightsbridge at the bottom, you made a line on a couple, like you outlined the shape where the, you know, one of the white space, where the white spaces are. No, following the curved line up.
Oh, here. Uh-huh.
Yes, at the bottom there, you've made a marker line all the way up to that.
Right here, you mean?
Yeah, but up beside the white tile, beside the white square.
Ah, right here.
Yeah.
As opposed to letting it be
Just
free.
be a pencil line. Yeah.
Right. And that's because I started the black line here and came down like this. I didn't have to.
But
I
it's
have
okay
to.
to.
Yeah, I would say yes. Given my example, I would definitely say yes. You know, it's so funny that you say that, and that's what I love is when people look at your work and they're like, "Huh, tell me about that." Just because to me it feels incomplete. I'm going to have to try it next time I teach a class like this. You know, just to see, because it would go right into the holly bar and I'd be like, okay, where's the edge there?
Yeah.
So, gosh, that's such a great question. Thank you for asking that question.
Well, you're welcome.
Because what we notice is that I did it here because it was pretty much in keeping with the same size, but here it would have been small. I could have done it here, but it wouldn't have been parallel. What I was trying to do was create parallel lines. That was the purpose in doing it. But we ran out of that opportunity because it would have been up in here, which is why I stopped. Wow, analysis of a Zentangle pattern. Go Mary. All right, I am going to start with a bit of shading, and I'm going to use pastels because they will be easier for you to see. You're going to put down your pen, your Micron pen, or whatever you're using, and pick up your pencil. And of course, well, I'll tell you right off the bat, I was about to say, I'll tell you right now that this is not art school. So it's not the sun is over here, so the shadow's over there, right? We don't have to be constrained by that. You can put the shadow where you want. My only suggestion, which brings us back to the conversation before about we don't want gray everywhere or black or cream. We want a nice mix of the three, is that you don't want to shade everything because it's like highlighting in a book. If you highlight everything, it's as if you highlighted nothing because it's all the same, right? So in shading, I tend to use my pencil without an eraser, and I hold it just as if I'm holding a regular pencil. My husband, on the other hand, and other people I have seen also, hold it more like this, and then they will use, you know, the thicker part of the lead as opposed to the point. The right way is the way that works best for you. So you choose, and I'm going to use, well, we'll do, shall we go subtle? We could do something subtle. Just as I fight with my chalks here. Oh, for heaven's sakes. All right, we'll see how well blue shows up. If not, we can go to green or something very lively in orange. So I'm going to use blue, and I'm going to start in the holly boss section. And there are so many different ways that you could shade. I'm just going to give you an example. And so I like things that are bold. And so I'm looking to the first two lines that I put down because that is the stroke that's over everything. And I want to emphasize that. So I'm taking my, oh, actually this is gray. Huh. All right, I'm not sure how, you'll probably see that okay. But we're going to go bigger and bolder than that. I'm going to lay down some color, which is what you will do with your pencil lead. And I'm going to put it on both sides because I really want to emphasize this. You could put it on both sides or just one side. You can also choose to go over lines that are there or not. So the possibilities are really limitless. It's really what your choice is. But once you've put down some pencil lead, and it might be between 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch of nice dark lead, you're then going to take your tortillon, in my case I'll use a tissue, and you're going to smudge it. And you're going to draw some of that color, meaning for you the gray color of the graphite, into that creamy area. So it's going to go pretty much from darker to lighter, an ombre kind of effect. And so shading can take a little getting used to, getting down the right amount of lead, whatever that feels like to you, deciding where you want to put it. I'm going to find a few other places that I want to emphasize. Though, of course, I'm not going to do this everywhere because I want to have that nice interplay of dark and light. It's feeling a little too sparse to me. Just a little there. And remember, you may want to rotate your tile also to get a different view. It might influence where you put the graphite, the pencil lead. And so this is that opportunity to be bold with a pencil, because if you don't put down enough of the pencil lead, the graphite, it's going to be too hard to really work with. And so take another half minute or so, and then we'll move into the kipple area, knowing that you don't need to rush. You can always work on these afterwards. I'm the kind of gal, though, that when I start a class, I like to finish a class during the class. Doesn't always happen. So please let me know if you have any questions about the shading. I'm gonna just add a circle in there. And so I'm going to go on to the kipple area, and what I like, which may be similar to or different from what you like, is I like to highlight or really showcase the big juicy circles that I made. So I tend to just go and put shading in the first layer. Of course, I made them so big, there really is only one layer in this instance. It's not always like that. But in the first layer of little circles that surround the big one. Because you can see, as soon as I put down some color around those big circles, they really just pop right out. And so that's just one way to do it. It's really your choice. You could do it completely differently and just do some shading in the big circles. You could make those big and gray if you wanted to. I just wouldn't do both the outside and the inside. And you may also want to rotate your tile again to get a different perspective before we move on to Knightsbridge. You might also decide that you don't want to put anything in Knightsbridge because you like the stark difference between the black and the creaminess. So that's certainly an option. To my way of thinking, my personal preference, it would feel unbalanced to me if I didn't have some shading there. And so I tend to do just a little. I put just a little bit of graphite in 2 of the corners of the white space, if I have 2. Like this one, I don't have 2, I only have 1. And then I can do that in every one of these columns of white, or I could do every other, depending on how much of the shading I wanted to do. If you like more gray, you might put it in all 4 corners. So you get to choose. And I'll say that there are definitely times where I'm not quite sure if I want to do more. Right? I've done something and I'm like, oh, this could be enough. If I do too much, it's going to feel overdone. I tend to take a picture at that point just so I have where it was, and then I forge ahead. And there are times when I'm happy about having forged ahead and times that I'm not quite as happy. I will say that I tend to do this at night. I find it really relaxing. And there are times where I look at a tile before going to sleep and I'm going, not one of my favorites. And then I wake up the next morning and oftentimes I have a different view about it. I'm like, look at that. The morning, different view. But there are times where I still don't love it. And I will tell you, it's got to be our secret though, that I put it on a card, a plain card, that I bought at a craft store, and I send it to a friend who now has some personal artwork from me. And they are none the wiser. For this wasn't one of my favorite tiles, and I'm happy to give it to you. Right? Is that not generous, perhaps? I don't know. But honestly, I mean, as Mary, you're no doubt finding out as you start to do this, you end up with a lot of these tiles or a lot of drawings, and you're like, well, I don't want to throw them out. I worked on these. I like these. I'd rather give them to someone. Find a way to do that. And so as you're finishing up, I'll just take another minute or two. Be sure, of course, to rotate your tile, because then we want to talk about placing your chop and starting the next tile. But I do give away, I make gifts that have people's initials in them with all kinds of Zentangle tiles. Here's just an example. So I used to volunteer for an organization called the Clearwater. And so the Clearwater cleans up the Hudson River. So if you're from this neck of the woods, you might know them. Pete Seeger started it a number of years ago. And so I thought, well, I love to teach Zentangle. I will offer to do a fundraiser for them in which people need to give a certain amount of money, and I will donate my time. And so I made this. This is on a canvas that's 2 feet by 2 feet. It has probably 40 or 50 designs in it. You might even recognize Hollybaugh right there. That's the one that you did. We're going to do this one next, which is called Poke Leaf. Here's Knightsbridge. There's no shading on this because I just did black marker on white canvas. But and this is, of course, not truly Zentangle because it's representational. And yet it's lovely, gets the point across, and was a nice thing for people to see. So I've started to do this on also very big pieces of wood and canvas. And so I'm hoping that that interlude has given you an opportunity to finish up with most of your shading. I can see Tova's holding hers out at arm's length, taking a look at it. That is exactly the thing to do, and look at it and rotate it, because you need to decide which orientation is up, because as soon as you put your chop on there, people will say, oh, this is how I'm supposed to look at it. So I'm not going to take mine off the wall to rotate. I'm going to put my chop between the edge of my frame here and the edge of the tile. So I'm just going to make my chop, which is that circle with a J in it. So you decide what looks like up to you, and sometimes people will do it more like a diamond shape, right? So it's really quite different. But that's your choice. And so I'm going to take this particular piece of paper down for the time being, well, for now, and put up a fresh piece of paper for our next tile. So I just want to be sure that there are no questions about anything that's up here before I take it away. Thank you. I needed that. Thank you, Mary. Here we go. All right, and so I will make a square again. There we go, better square. So that is my new tile, starting afresh. But I want to pause here for a moment just to ask how you're all doing, and if anyone would care to show what they have done. There's a bit of silence there. Anyone care to show? All right, Mary. And oh, terrific. Oh, look. Beautiful. Oh, just gorgeous. Fantastic. Oh, beautiful. Oh, well done. Do you have any thoughts or comments about this? How are you feeling? Good. I can read that little lip reading. Good. Okay, thumbs up. Excellent. All right, well, of course, you're always welcome to ask questions. We are now going to dive into another tile. I am, again, going to make the dot in each corner. We don't always work within a square, as you can tell from other things that you've seen. It just is an easy entry point into the process. And it might give you an opportunity, again, to practice with that idea I gave you about looking where you're going when you're making that straight line. Or you could just get super fancy and like put a squiggle in your lines, because as you can tell from your previous drawing, the pencil marks really get lost in your design because we're just using light pencil marks here. So I'm not probably even going to see these in my final design, but it's just kind of fun to make, and I don't feel the pressure of, oh my gosh, it's got to be straight. And then I'm going to hold on to my pencil for just another moment and make a string within this space. It's going to be a little different this time. So once again, I'm going to have 3 spaces. Someone said to me, do you always work in 3 patterns on a tile? And the answer is no. But when I have 90 minutes, we do 2 tiles that have 3 patterns each. But it could be 1 tile that had 6 patterns. But then, you know, clearly that's going to be a little more challenging when you're just beginning, because you're getting used to the size that you're working on, that 3.5-inch square, which is generally kind of small. All right, I'm going to put down my pencil and pick up my marker, and we're going to begin with a pattern called Zander, Z-A-N-D-E-R. I was about to say, and I had to laugh to myself, as I was about to say, oh, it's one of my favorite patterns, but I say that about a dozen times a day, so it's close to meaningless, actually. But it is one of my faves. And so Zander is going to go in the middle here. I find that to be the easiest place to begin, and as you can see, I have this shape here. And so there are a couple of different ways of looking at making Zander. And this actually, I thought of after I'd been doing it for a number of years. We're going to make 2 rings. They're really like the letter C, sort of laying on its back. And you could also rotate your tile a little. So if you're like, oh gosh, that looks hard, or it looks more like a super fat U, that's okay too. But if you rotated your tile just a little like this, it would feel like you are making a capital C. And that's something you're very familiar with, and so it would probably be easy to you. And so I'm going to make just a couple of sets of rings around the string here, and we'll work within this space. And then Zander has a lot of opportunity for you to make it very much your own. When I teach it very methodically. You don't have to approach it in the same way, but I look to where is the center of this space I'm working in, and I put pretty much a line, not perfect, pretty much in the center, and it's just like the holly bar though. It goes underneath the rings that are already there. Now, once again, I have made mistakes where I've gone straight through a ring, and then I just sort of go, oh, look at that. What am I going to do to work with that? And then I think of something. I either shade in the ring, or I color in the rings, or I just work with it, because this is that opportunity to just pause and be reflective and recognize that I can figure that out. I can work with that. And so once I've done that middle space, I'm going to fill up the rest of the space, this middle space, with lines that are dots and dashes, some kind of combination, and it could be symmetrical on both sides, but it doesn't have to be. This is where your individuality comes in, and I've seen plenty of folks that just do dots for this entire area. And I think it looks amazing. I also don't have the patience for that. That is just not my personality. So I can truly appreciate it, and yet that just won't be me. I could do it, but it would be a struggle. And I also get to the point, because I've almost filled in half of it now, where I'm almost at my string up here. And I could make my next line right on this string, but I like it to have a little more energy. So I tend to do almost like a giant parenthesis or an incomplete C. And then, because it gives it some definition. You know, what you were talking about, Mary, before, I think, like, you know, why did you put the line there? And that kind of question. So I just like the way that looks, so that's what I do. But I see people do all kinds of interesting things. And then I pretty much finished one side. I'm going to do the other side. And I don't go for symmetry here, so I'm just going to figure out what appeals to me and do that. And so I'm wondering how you're doing. And so yours may be as filled in as mine is. It may be a little more sparse because you prefer that, and that's fine. Or it might be more dense. So take another minute or so, and then we will move on to our next pattern called Poke Leaf. And that is actually the name of a real plant. That is not made up. And
Was this all of this that we just did part of Xander? Or
yes.
Okay.
When I still see heads down, I know that I need to take a more than a New York minute to pause. So Poke Leaf is one of my favorite patterns. Imagine that. I'm going to put it in here. It can be a little difficult to see at the beginning because it starts way down in this corner. So I'm going to start by putting one over here outside my tile so you can get a good look at it. So I tend to make Poke Leaf with a V. And then a shape that looks like that. Almost, the top part is almost like a spade, right, in a deck of cards. And some people are like, oh, that looks tough, right? And so in which case I say, all right, let's figure that out. How can we make it easier? And I would suggest doing it the opposite way. So there's my stem, but it's now going to come in this direction. And I'm betting that you're very familiar with making a heart shape. Right? So I want it to be moving up here, but you could rotate your tile 180 degrees so we get the same effect. So I'm going to put my first stem in there, and then I'm going to pretend to go behind the Xander. So I'm not going to go cross over the top of it. I'm going to pretend to go behind right here. So I have one poke leaf, and then the remaining poke leaves, your stem can go in any direction, and it's going to come out of an existing leaf. So it's really very freeform, and it's going to fill up this space. And there may be times where a leaf ends up behind one that you've already drawn. So be sure to ask me if you have any questions along the way. I love this one because to me it has a lot of energy. And so in the heart that I showed you earlier, there was also poke leaf. So you can see that there as another example with a little embellishment of little circles around the outside of it. So how is your poke leaf coming along? And all answers are acceptable. If it's challenging or a struggle, I'm happy to help. If it's going just great, that's good too. So as you finish up that one, before we go on to the next pattern, I will say that Rick and Maria have, a website, which is zentangle.com. They've written a number of books. This is the first one, which is incredibly beautiful with lots of great information. If you're looking to do more learning than admiring, there is plenty of learning in there, but there's even more learning in here. And if you sign up for their website, you get at least once a month information and new patterns, where they show you all the steps, what's called a step out, like each step along the way to making new patterns. And so really very beautiful. I'm actually teaching a class on Wednesday nights now, which can be found on my website calendar page, in which we're doing what's called Project Pack 14. So I think it's 11 different patterns. That's one of them I showed you before. That was that green Jelly Roll pen. And the Project Pack was created around Mental Health Awareness Month, which is May. Of course, we did a little after May, but we're doing it for weeks into the summer, and we're doing one 2-page spread every week or so. And it's amazing and challenging. And so those project packs can be found also on the website, but the videos are there, and the videos are free, and you don't have to buy the materials. You can work with what you have at home. So there's just a wealth of material on their site. All right, I'm going to share with you the name of the next pattern that we're going to work on. Are you feeling up for a little challenge? Yes? Good. So the last pattern that we'll do today is called Cadent, C-A-D-E-N-T. And it's a grid pattern, but it looks quite different than Knightsbridge. And you will put it in your remaining space. And it starts by making a grid of either, well, I would make little circles as opposed to dots. So I start down at the bottom to make it easy for myself to get a pretty straight line to start with. And so I'm spacing these with some room because you're going to have to put a mark within those rooms, so don't put them too close together, right? And so I'm going to make a grid in this space with circles to the best of my ability, knowing that Xander's there on the side, and of course at some point the grid will run up against it. I also know, in doing this work, I draw on the wall a lot when I'm teaching, but I also know that it would be easier for me if this were down flat in front of me. And so I'm always thinking about how can I make this work so that I get the best results and I don't feel like I'm struggling. Always something to keep in mind. So I've got my grid of little circles. And so once you have that grid, we will work with it. And so be sure that you've left room in between. Could be a little late to say that. What we're going to do is we're going to put an S shape on the page. So I'm going to start up at the top just because it's easier for me to go from top to bottom, particularly if you start working with jelly roll pens, which you might do on a black tile or a gray tile or a tan tile. They tend to be very juicy and they don't dry quickly. So I like to always start up at the top. And I'm literally going to make the letter S. And it starts at the top of my circle, my top circle here. And the S rolls around the bottom circle. And I'm just going to do that all the way down the page. So I'm just making the letter S. So the top of it curls around the top circle, the bottom of the S curls around the bottom. And I have gone over the edge here a bit, but I still have room before my frame. So I'm going to do that all the way down the page. And then I'll do that with the next column also. Gosh, I got really flourishy there. So I've got a lot, I'm taking up a lot of space with my very curvaceous S. Sometimes people were like, oh gosh, I'm having trouble making an S. I've sort of made it backwards. It doesn't matter. As long as you are consistent, it's going to come out just fine. And if it doesn't come out just fine, you've just made yourself a new pattern. What can we say? Actually, you know what, I'm gonna, when I do this, because I'm doing it on a wall, I don't really rotate my tile, but I want you to see how that happens, because that's where the magic is in this pattern. So at this point, you probably have something that looks a lot like this. Is that about right? Thank you. Good, Kim. Love the thumbs up. Yoshin's going, oh, maybe, sort of. Mary, I saw that look. What was that look about? All right, so have you been able to finish up your S's, your columns of S's? Okay, just about everybody has. Right, so the next move that's magic, that makes it all come together, I just have to be sure that we're all ready to do it together. That's why I ask. So I'll take another 30 seconds or so. Okay, looks like everyone's ready to go. So I did this on scrap paper, so you could see literally how I do this. So you can see I made this bigger, but it looks exactly like this. I'm gonna take my tile and turn it 90 degrees. So just do a quarter turn. So now it's gonna look like this. Is that making sense? Okay, you're welcome to say no. And that, in which case I will do it again. All right, so now that it's like this, you'll do the same thing that you did before. So here's my circle. I'm gonna make an S and come here. Another S. And so I just do that with the columns again. And it looks like magic. So you're doing exactly what you did before. S is coming down, and you will have that beautiful shape. I will now turn into a contortionist and do it, practically standing on my head because this is on the wall. But it will look the same as yours when we're done. And of course, if you have any questions, be sure to ask. Mary, you have such an expressive face. Your eyebrows are going up. And I'm like, what's going on there?
That was just so much fun to make.
Isn't that cool? It's like it's like magic, right? It's like, oh, look at that. A little quarter turn makes a huge difference. I mean, and it's so easy to relate so much of this to our lives and our practice, right? Breathing deeply, not ruminating, being in the moment. Ah, Tova's giving it the outstretched arm look. Excellent. Well done. It's amazing, right? I mean, people come in, and a lot of people are hesitant to try because they're like, I don't draw. I draw stick figures. This is going to be hard for me. But you make marks all the time with your handwriting. And even if your handwriting isn't as gorgeous as you would like it to be, you are accustomed to making so many of these marks.
You said it's not supposed to be representational, but when I look at this, the first one, the Xander?
Yes. Uh-huh.
It looks like a broom to me.
I hear that. And it's you will find Xander. So, for example, in this one on the Clearwater, this is Xander right here, done just a bit differently, right?
Right.
And so, to me, actually, I'm of the generation that watched the Jetsons on TV. Dare I say that? And to me, this reminds me of the Jetsons, right? Because it was a space age world, and all of that. And so every time I do this, I think of the Jetsons. So you're right. I think sometimes by accident, but it's not intentional.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. For sure.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I noticed myself going back and making some of the dots that I made darker. Is that thing?
Totally fine. We call that redefining the line. So you're going back and embellishing and redefining, absolutely part of what we do. There's a tile, I don't have it down here right now, it's upstairs, but it was in one of the project packs. And those are very intense experiences, wonderful. But it took me 3.5 hours to do the tile. So I didn't do it all at once. I did it over time. And some of the first lines I drew at the very beginning needed to be defined again because there had been so much color and so much other work around it. All right, and so I am going to take kind of an evergreen, she says that, knowing that I just might be wrong when I actually put it on the paper, but that's what it looks like to me right now. I'm going to put down my pen, pick up my pencil, so to speak. So for me, it will be the chalk. And chalk is really dusty, so you have to be careful that you don't make a mess in your house when you're doing it this way. And so I'm going to go back to Xander. You can choose where you want to do the shading. I like to set off the rings, and so I tend to put my shading right underneath the rings. You could put it on both sides of the rings. You could shade or even use your pen to fill in the rings, which I did when I went through the rings by mistake one time. Or you could choose to do that first line, the center line, and shade directly on that and then pull the graphite into both directions, into the juicy, creamy areas. Or you could do the outline. I mean, I wouldn't do all of that just because that's going to be a lot of gray, but that's why, for me, this doesn't get old, because it's like, oh, I haven't done it this way. I haven't shaded this way in a while. I haven't used that stroke in a while. So you certainly get different types of feeling from where you put the shading. You know, whether you have more stationary effect, which to me is this one, like it's sort of not really moving. If I had chosen to do the line that was heading upward in the same direction as the point, it would have felt like there was more energy there. To me, right? That's just my thinking. There are so many ways, and I'm gonna share a couple of ideas with you. I don't want you to race or think that you need to. I just want to offer up some ideas for shading, because we have about 8 or 9 minutes left, and I want you to know the possibilities and know that you don't need to race. With poke leaf, I tend to put the shading right at the top of each of the stems, as I would call them, because then I'm pulling the graphite into the big creamy area, and they're also moving up the page, so it feels like a lot of energy to me, and I like that part. I'll show you though, on the example from the clear water, how, since I wasn't doing any shading, when I did poke leaf here, right here, I did black behind each of the leaves. And so you could do that with either the marker or the graphite, the pencil, and it would be gray. So they're just limitless, well, not limitless, but there are several possibilities, to be more accurate. There are times where I also just use the pen to color in the stems, because they also march up the page, and I like that effect of movement. Take another minute or so, and then we'll talk about Cadence. And so with Cadence, you might do what we did with Knightsbridge. So I'm going to show you something different. But you might go into two of the corners opposite each other, or all four of them. And you might do that for a whole column or a row or every other row. I mean, you decide. That would be one way to do it. Actually, I'm going to show you two other things. Once again, I wouldn't do both, but that's me. You could actually also just use your pencil to color in an entire pattern here. So here it's every other one that I colored in, and then I'd probably do the next row like that. And this is, it feels almost like a kind of a parquet floor, right? So kind of interesting, kind of a takeoff on Knightsbridge, although it's being done with your pencil, so it's gray. And even when you color in with your pencil, be sure to use the smudger or your pinky over the top of it to smooth the pencil strokes. So you might do that. Okay. Or if you were feeling like, gosh, I've got a lot of gray going on here, I'm thinking I need something different, you might pick up your pen again, which I will do, and you could do what's called an aura. So this is not scientifically an aura. This is our language for aura. And it's where you either go on the inside of a shape and make what you might call like a shadow. So I'm just taking my pen and I'm making as if it were a shadow. So it never touches the actual shape, but it makes another shape within it. And so that can be kind of fun if you feel you have too much gray, or you could even put gray inside of this if you wanted to. To me, this is starting to feel a little busy, but that's my taste. It doesn't need to be yours. And so now you have several different ideas for working with shading around Xander, Pokeleaf, and Cadent. And of course, once you finish your shading in all three areas, or whatever you choose to do, you're going to want to hold out your tile at arm's length, decide what looks like up to you, and add your chop. Chloe's giving it the look. She's holding it out, figuring it out. And so I find this work to be, for the most part, relaxing. There are times with Rick's Paradox where I found it very frustrating, actually, until I actually got it, which took a lot of work. But I use it sometimes in other settings, organizations or corporations, around teamwork, right? Because what we've been doing for the past hour and a half or so is you've all been seeing the same things, hearing the same things, and making your own work, which is both similar and different. And isn't that how teams often work? Right? So we bring our own flair to it, our own personality and style, way of being. And so we do have about, I believe, 2 minutes left or so, and I don't mean to rush you, but I'm sure that, some people have a place they need to be next. But I'd love to hear any impressions that you have of this experience. And of course, all answers are acceptable, meaning that if you found it challenging or difficult, it's fine to say that too. And if you found it those things and also fun and interesting, that's okay. So whatever you're thinking or feeling.
I can do this all day.
So can I.
Yeah, I find it delightful. I like patterns, and yeah, I really enjoyed this time, and I think I will come back to it.
Terrific. Excellent. Thank you, Tova and Yoshin.
I have really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed also your little things you've said along the way, like not using an eraser because like in life, if something happens, we can't undo it, but we can take what's there and go forward. And Doodling is mindless and Zentangle is mindful. I've enjoyed this whole thing very much.
I'm so glad, Mary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was nice to have the teacher, the leading it was really good. I had experimented a little bit with the concept, and that's why I really wanted to come to this, because I had not found that experimenting with it had really worked very well. I wanted to kind of get the structure, and I can see that the structure sort of is really kind of carrying the kind of contemplative aspect of it.
Absolutely, Jamie. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because you'll find many books out there, and they focus on the method. How do you make the strokes, as opposed to the philosophy, and how do you incorporate it into your life?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
And Kim, did you want to say something? I don't want to cut you off.
I was just going to say I loved it. Thank you very much. I loved holding the paper in different ways to see what came out.
Excellent.
And doing the little thing with your initials.
Yes, making your chalk.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have one quick thought, and it's completely up to you. Sometimes in groups, people will hold up their tiles, and then I can take a screenshot if you want, Chloe, or you can do it. But if you're holding up your tile, you're going to have probably not enough hands to do that. And then I can send it to you, and you can send it out to folks. So if we start with the first tile, I can take a picture of everyone. Beautiful. All right, we'll just wait for you to put yours up, Chloe, so you are included also. Maybe just up a little higher, Chloe. There we go. Terrific. And how about tile number 2? And I'll send these to you this afternoon, Chloe. Beautiful. Terrific. And so now you will have a memory also. It has been my pleasure to be with you. If I can answer any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you so much.